I'd highly recommend viewing this episode on YouTube rather than as an audio podcast because there are many visual examples presented. Hello and welcome to the Color Mentor podcast. My name is Paul Hanrahan. I'm a colorist, originally from South Africa. Now I'm based in Taiwan. On this podcast, I'm going to be talking to people who have mentored and inspired me on my color grading journey over the years. So welcome to the show. If you'd like to learn more about color grading, you can head over to my Patreon. It's called Color Mentor at patreon.com, and it includes basic skill training all the way up to full coursework on various topics. I also offer one-on-one mentoring for those who want to refine their craft further. But without further ado, let's get on with the show. Hi, and welcome to this episode of the Color Mentor podcast. It's going to be a slightly different format. In this episode, I've done an interview with a psychologist based in Japan. You probably know his name, Akiyoshi Kitaoka. He's a professor of psychology, as I mentioned, and he, over and above his teaching and studies, he does these amazing visual illusions. And they're all linked into the research that he does, and it's about examining various aspects to human visual cognition and how it links to obviously the psychological processes, the vision system, and all sorts of psychophysical properties of our vision. Because of the language differences, I did a written interview and he's written answers. And now what I'm going to be doing is firstly presenting those answers, but also doing a bit of a curation of his various works on his website, and especially from the colorist and the color-minded point of view, we're going to be looking at how he has analyzed and manipulated color spaces and done some very interesting things, and maybe some inspiration to how we in the film industry do our job. So yeah, let's dive into it. You're probably familiar with some of these works, and I'd highly encourage you going to his website. I'll put a link in the description below and you can go and have a look. There's so much there that it's easy to get lost. There's just so much stuff. So yeah, enjoy. This is Dr. Kitaoka, and he's involved in some interesting projects like some printing and some various collaboration with other artists. We'll talk more about what these portraits and image manipulations represent. Interesting thing is you really have to sometimes zoom them small to see what they actually are. So it's all about viewing distance as well. Yeah, a lot of aspects all inside there. This one's very interesting. 10% of the face mixed with 90% of the grid gives us something that sometimes if you just zoom to a certain size, you'll see that the face reappears. So that if you get too close, disappears. But around about here, there'll be some blending going on, and we'll start discerning the face, and at different resolutions it'll come and go depending on the scaling. Quite fascinating. I showed Dr. Kitaoka some of my artworks. They're not illusions as such, but they're tessellations and overlays, layering of various images. Because when I was young, Escher was the big inspiration to me, and that's kind of a bridging with black and white woodcuts, and then also this idea of visual illusions, but of a different sort. I mentioned these aspects to Dr. Kitaoka. One of the things he mentioned was his teachers and who inspired him on his journey. So what were the factors that inspired you to follow this path? I'm researching visual illusions or optical illusions. According to the teachings of the late Shogo Imai, we must research visual illusions with the best figures that generate the strongest effects. And that's the best place to do the research. Also, according to the teachings of the late Koro Noguchi, the strongest visual illusions are also visually beautiful, which is an interesting correlation. I put these teachings into practice, and then the result of my research will naturally take on an artistic aspect. So that's a great combination of the scientific research aspects with the intriguing artistic aspects. These are some of the published works of his various teachers. This paper by Koro Noguchi is on the relationships between visual illusions, aesthetic preference, an attempt to unify experimental phenomenology and empirical aesthetics. These are experiments to work on the various gastro figures, which are shapes that can be seen two ways, are multi-stable. I also noticed that on Akiyoshi's Instagram, he likes taking photographs of trains. So I also remember that being a thing of my dad's generation, talking about trains and the numbers and how many cars they were pulling, and was it a freight train or passenger train. So I asked him about this, and I said that I see you love trains. In England, they have a saying for people who love trains. They call them train spotters, sometimes jokingly suggesting that they might have a very strange hobby. But I find it fascinating that you're not only passionate about trains, but you're also a professor of psychology. And he says, great. In Japan, train spotters are called tekan. Excuse my pronunciation, but I think that's what it is. I asked about academic life. You're a professor of psychology at Ritsumeikan University. Can you tell us about the field of psychology and linked into the fields of visual perception, psychophysics, visual cognition, and neuroscience? My field is psychology of perception. So it includes psychophysics or visual cognition and is related to neuroscience. Even if the fields of psychology are different, the methods of research are quite similar. He also teaches first-year psychology to students, topics like perception, psychological statistics, etc. I asked about the combination of academic work and the art that he creates, and he asked how these two worlds combine. He said, I give lectures and put on exhibits at the request of science museums and schools, etc. On the other hand, I don't know how to promote in non-academic circles, so I did nothing in particular, other than just promoting on social networks. He did state that he's very interested in finding ways to bring these interesting academic ideas and art to the public. I asked him what was the main area of his academic research and any papers that he's currently working on. He said he works on anything that's superthreshold perception and can be a subject of study. And he's currently working on a study of Maxwell's spot. Maxwell showed that in the foveal region, the central area of our vision, if we were to stare at an area of a solid color like this blue field, we would find a darker area in the middle would slowly appear if we fixed our vision without any movement. And this is just different sensitivities in the different areas of the fovea. In this paper, he also points out that OLED screens versus LCD screens have different success at showing this because of the different frequency of the blue peak, the blue primary in those two different types of display technologies. But we'll talk about this more in a bit. I asked him, in the broader view, what are the main goals or milestones of his research in the future? He said, I have no idea. I only keep discovering new illusions or revealing unknown mechanisms of known illusions. If you take time to look through his website, you'll notice something quite specific, that he does huge amounts of iterations. So I asked, it seems that your process of analyzing a problem is very methodical. For example, listing all color spaces and showing many options of full gamut grayscale sweeps, saturation sweeps, etc. You also try every combination of colors for your images. Seems like making these lists of combinations of all variables. Can you tell us about this method and how it reveals results? He replied that he felt that the illusions themselves can be explained by how we visualize and manipulate them in various color spaces. Just to give you a visual example, you can see here that whatever's displayed up top here is the actual image that will be placed in those various color spaces. Probably recognize some of these spaces. HCV, which is actually a space that he has developed, YXY, LAB, various spaces. HSL, HSV, some of them you might recognize. This is essentially the gamut boundary of the RGB cube as it appears in these various spaces. The next image would be ramps. This image here is what's being plotted in each case. And you'll see how it traces these kind of framework to show the sweeps through various parts of the color spaces. Next is showing the lighter 3 parts, almost like the roof of the color volume. And then these are the darker 3, which would be the kind of the floor. And then 12 different hue sweeps, some of them going from black through to maximum saturation. Also these color cubes. These ones go to peak white, these ones go to black point, which is quite typical of how we test looks in our look development process. We want to look at the path to white and how the color volume moves through the different exposure ranges. So over and above these sweeps, which we'll look at later, these constant, so for example, keeping everything else the same, but just varying saturation. We have these different saturation levels, and we see how they appear in the color spaces. So this is an underlying theme in his work, which we'll highlight later. So these are equisaturation rings, or depending on the different aspects of the space. Constant hue slices, and these are, for example, maximum saturation to white, maximum saturation to black. These are equal luminance. So at a luminance of 0.231 in the 0 to 1 scale, he then looks at the maximum saturation. Also taking the various distributions of colors, then randomizes the pixel locations, and then does various brightness adjustments on them. So getting all these different, essentially, paths or slices or sections of the color volume and then analyzing. And you see that this list just goes on and on and on. There's huge detail here. These are constant hue slices. So essentially every parameter gets analyzed and plotted. So in digging deeper on this, I was asking was there a specific goal in mind with documenting these spaces? Were you just making lists of each, or were you actually looking for something in particular? He mentioned that he wanted to promote the HCV color model because it was defined as being based on sRGB, i.e. the color system we use on our computer displays. It has a resemblance to the Munsell color system, and it corresponds well to the DKL model, which is often used in color vision research, which is quite unfamiliar for us in the film world. However, it's not an equal color space like LAB. Also, although I proposed the HCV color model, I have not confirmed that there are no other similar models already being devised. So it's a working model that he's kind of devised, may or may not have been adopted elsewhere. I was asking if he's looking to do more of this kind of development, but he says that the HCV seems to be enough for his purposes. And he says, this year I proposed a new spatial color mixing theory based upon the sRGB based Ostwald color system. And that's also based, manipulations of and visualization is done in the HCV color space. But we'll dive into that Ostwald color space in a later section. More detail on why he created the HCV. If we look at HSL color space, HSV color space, there's something to note that the way that it's been mapped here, you get the impression that maximum saturation of all hues is at a similar brightness. In the color model, it may be represented that way. But his HCV has hexagonal representation and a circular representation. But have a look here. See how dark the blue is? Then the red, then magenta, then green, cyan, yellow, and white. And this is a far more better representation of how bright the colors actually appear, so that there's luminance. Visually, we can see the luminance information is also represented in the space, as well as hue and saturation and the neutral axis. HSV and HSL are calculated from grayscale values 0 to 255 in an 8-bit system. To study color in vision science, gray levels should be transferred to a linear luminance values through some kind of gamma correction. So HCV can be regarded as a linear correlated version of one of these two cone type systems, either the HSL or the HSV. I mentioned that in the film industry, people are now using the Chen spherical model for a lot of their manipulations. So just to show you what the Chen model looks like, so this is our color cube, all values equally spaced out. If we transfer into this Chen color space, it's more, we get these kind of representations of the signal, where it's now been turned into a spherical representation, where hues are now moved around 360-degree angles. We've got brightest to darkness, and that's how we would manipulate the space. And that's, I'm not a developer myself, but developers use this as a tool to better access the various parameters and do cleaner manipulations. Now, I asked him about the Chen color space, if he'd heard of it or used it, and I mentioned that also at one point a few years back, people were trying to use LMS as a space to do manipulations for color grading. I asked, do you feel that the existing color models have limitations, and do we need to find better ones? Or is it that the existing models are quite adequate? He answered that he thought that linear transformation or gamma correction is necessary to better change chromatic images, to manipulate images and view them. For example, color mixing between 000 and 255, 255, so black and white, makes a normalized gray in the middle of 128 with nonlinear transformation. But with the nonlinear transformation, it becomes darker than the original because the luminance is not considered. On the other hand, color mixing between 0 and 255, the black and white, makes a gray of 188 with the nonlinear transform. This is an example, the RGB linear, and how it's transferred, the bit values and how they're transferred into the 0 to 1 scale in a more accurate representation of actual brightness rather than just straight up code values. I wondered how his world of research on color and our world of, color management and those kinds of things, I wondered how close they were. So I asked about, in our industry making images, film and television, there's a strong orthodoxy that we have to battle against. For example, people feel that image making is a simple task of conveying captured stimuli, technically by the camera. Instead, we feel that the images are always interpreted artistic creations loaded with meaning and cultural assumptions. Have you encountered this kind of debate in the image making process? And to that, and also debates about scene referred and display referred and these kind of concepts, he kind of just replied simply that no, because I've only studied perception, not these cognitive aspects or context and senses. So yeah, that's kind of an area where there wasn't an overlap between what we do. I noticed that in some of his, on his website, and obviously for his scientific studies, he gives, with the image, he will also give questionnaires. A good example is this image for the what's called Chromostereopsis. So based on different colors, we will perceive some 3D depth, and it's sometimes different between male and female. It'll be different ages and just differences in people's eyes. Some people say that the blue is in front, some people say the red is in front, and he will do surveys on each to kind of document and quantify these effects. And he said that knowing the extent of individual difference in visual illusions is useful when conducting laboratory experiments. So this is a critical part of the results and the statistics that get generated through his experimentation. I asked that, has he found that results vary a lot among people? And he says it depends. For example, with this Chromostereopsis, 60 to 70% people see red in front of blue, whereas 10 to 20% see blue in front of red. But the ratio is pretty much stable. So it seems, just among humans, there's that kind of variation. Because he's doing research in the psychological department, I did question about the replication crisis, which was an issue with lots of psychological studies, which were very hard to reproduce in follow-up experiments. And, there have been things like open science framework and pre-registration of studies to try and normalize and protect against these very subjective results. His answer was quite simple, and they said that since illusions are super threshold perception, it's actually, almost everyone can see them. The problem of reproducibility is not such a problem, which I think is a great succinct answer. We mentioned before the Ostwald color model. Firstly, just to give a little bit of background on Wilhelm Ostwald. Turn of the century, he was a physicist and extremely bright chap. He was a chemist. He'd won a Nobel Prize in chemistry, but also had some theorems about color. And he formulated this Ostwald color model, this color solid, something akin to a Munsell chart, actually a physical object that was printed out and could be displayed like this to view various colors in their location. The Munsell is obviously also shows the relative brightness of colors. So blues would be darker, yellows would be brighter. Where you see this one, in terms of brightness, it's more like the HSL color model, where most saturation can only happen at mid-luminance in its color model. The way that Akiyoshi has used this Ostwald theories is to say that for any particular color, so for example, this cyan color, we can break it down into slightly different color components. In our TV system, we use RGB. In printing, you might use CMYK, and these are the primary colors. You can actually re-examine these values and re-allot them, put them into different proportions. So he defines an area where RG and the height, or the amount of signal, where RG and B are all present at the same height, we would define as white content. Because if we use that in isolation, that would be totally neutral somewhere along the grayscale axis. Now this area that is blank at the top, there's no signal, and that is a sign of some kind of darkening. In the case of a fully black image, that would be 100%. In a fully white image, obviously, this white content would be all the way up at the top. We have those two components. We have the white content, we have the black content, and then the area where there's an imbalance between the three R, G, and B parameters we would consider as the color content. So just like we break down color models into R, G, and B, or H, S, L, hue, saturation, and luminance, or whatever, this is just another way of quantifying and packaging those various values. And you can see that on his website he gives the way that these are calculated, and this is just the mathematical translation of what's shown visually here. So this cyan color gets broken down into so much white content, so much black content, and so much of a particular color, hue and saturation. And any particular color can be broken down in this way. So this pinkish strip can be broken down into this much white, this much black, and this much magenta. Why would you do this? If you think in the world of printing, where you actually got a bottle of paint and you need to print with this color or that color, you need to basically simplify your color palette and use layers. And this is very typical in the screen printing process, which we will talk about in a moment. So in description of how Akiyoshi's applying this Ostwald color model, it says, in this presentation we introduce a new technique for juxtapositional color mixing that applies the concept of Ostwald color system. Juxtapositional color mixing is a method of visually mixing appropriate primary colors by spatially arranging them in parallel and allowing the observer to perceive a full color image. So the image itself is only made of primaries, but the way that they're placed physically and the distance, so the resolution, whether the resolution starts getting blurred, we see that as a new unique color. So it's a type of color mixing. Most of today's color displays use additive juxtapositional color mixing with R, G, and B primary colors as a means of color expression. In these color displays, the subpixel of the primary colors are too small to be distinguished by the naked eye. We would need a magnifying glass to see the pixels. But even if the subpixels are displayed large enough to be distinguished, a full color image can be perceived within a certain range. In this study, we introduce a new technique that applies the concept of the Ostwald color system to juxtapositional color mixing. The concept of the Ostwald color system is that all colors can be described as a composite ratio of amount of white, amount of black, and amount of pure color. The Ostwald color system assumes colors are realized by sequential color mixing using a rotational color mixing wheel. A long time ago, and probably starting with this guy, actually what he's holding there, that's James Clerk Maxwell, who when he was very young did fundamental research on color and color mixing, essentially just a spinning disc, and he could change all the makeup and the ratios of the amount of red, the amount of green, the amount of blue, or the amount of black and the amount of white, and spin the disc very fast. Through viewing the disc while it was spinning, he could work out what were the best colors to be the primaries in a color mixing system. This is a photograph of presumably one of the real deal color mixing discs. The Ostwald color system assumes colors that are realized by a sequential color mixing using a rotating color mixing wheel. But in this study, we apply this concept to juxtapositional color mixing, which is as it is in a monitor, small amounts in each pixel. Specifically, we define the white, black, and pure color of each hue based on sRG and B, the sRGB color system, because that's what we have on our display, and displays the ratio of each amount as an area ratio. We consider the usefulness of this technique. He mentioned that he felt that this had application in dyeing, so screen printing. And on his website, he does a collaboration with Koyo Yuzen at the Washino dyeing factory, where his images are firstly separated into certain colors. So this image, it's printed on white, so no printing would be the white, then black, blue, and yellow. So this has 3 screen prints. The screens are etched in various ways. Then the colors are applied one by one with a squeegee process, and then moving this along and along with very careful magnifying glass, checking that the screen is aligned at each point. And what they end up with, so that's all the yellow printed, then the blue goes on, and then presumably the black. And then at the end of the day, after a lot of precise work, you end up with fabric that's got the full color image on it. So as a way to go from an sRGB image, Akiyoshi felt that this was a good way to actually break an image down into what are the dyes in a screen printing process that would make up this image in the best way. So for example, this image is made up of 3 colors and also black and white. So it would be 5 inks in total, but the white wouldn't be printed if it was being printed on white fabric. I think it probably produces a more vivid image than RGB because the actual, call it the primaries, the actual dye layers will be very strong. What's interesting about these images is that they are very much affected by the viewing distance. If you get too close to them, you kind of feel that it just breaks up. The reality of the image breaks up. But as you zoom smaller, you can make more sense of what the image is. Because obviously they've been printed very crudely, but they show the underlying image formation mechanism. So black and white, which would sit on the axis here. There's a cyan print color, orange, and then very small amounts of that green color at maximum saturation. So essentially, you get a good image because you're using things with large saturations and you're pulling your gamut apart. You're expanding your gamut by using very pure colors. I asked, does the Ostwald model have some links to the differential nature of human vision? Black to white, green to red, and yellow to blue, different signals that could make the neurons in the eye. And I think I was maybe trying to put 2 and 2 together and get 5 there. He said, I don't think that is the case. I think that the visual system has attributes of blackness and whiteness other than hue, lightness, and chroma. So yeah, it has its attributes which monitor any signal coming in. I asked if there are wider applications for using this model. I asked what part of Ostwald's color theories do you feel are the most important? He gave this example of how we could create some kind of color harmony in accordance with the sRGB display. So if we take a color slice, you can see that we've got the whole color space, and we're taking the slice from green to magenta, also from black to white. Once each color chip has been translated into the Ostwald values, you can see how it's shown at various percentages in terms of area. Like if you mix these 3 together, you would get the original color there. It's showing you how much of each of those, how much blackness, whiteness, and color aspect there is at each pixel. And now this is very much the meticulous processing. It then goes to show how that any image like this can be, he does histogram adjustments, and we'll talk about those later. And then for each part, so each pixel, each block, each section is then done an Ostwald conversion, taking its area to be how much black, how much of the color, and how much white. We look at the image like this and we think, yeah, sure, that's a kind of a full color image. We see at least some red, some cyan, some green, all these colors. If we zoom in and we break the illusion, we'll realize that red, because of the color constancy and the way our visual system is trying to re-expand this collapsed gamut, we see red here where there was none, for starters. So that's a visual cognition aspect. But in terms of what he's actually displaying, you'll see that this could be printed with black and white and cyan, and you would get the bulk of this image effect. There are slight other colors. You'd probably need another dye. If you were going to be printing this image, there would be this kind of slightly greener color. But in terms of the colors that are actually in this frame, that's it. The rest is just presented for your cognition to do the rest. If we zoom into the hand here, you'll see that also mostly it's just black, white, and cyan in those areas. So quite fascinating. And then, as usual, Akiyoshi will go through pushing this initial image, reducing its gamut, and then pushing it into either the cyan corner, the magenta corner, or the yellow corner, and you get the opposite effects where your visual system is. So this is the art and psychology angle of his works. I was asking that if we say that the color model is some kind of map, but the human visual system, the biology of it, and the actual sensation of looking at something is the actual territory which the map is trying to describe. How far do you feel that these two things differ from each other, firstly? And for example, how much faith should we have in the 1931 CIA Human Observer model, and should it be applied as wisely as it is nowadays? And his reply was, I think that our visual system
has a map that corresponds to the color model. And this idea will be explained with color constancy very easily. So his works really live in the domain of the idea of color constancy. So just to dive into that for a moment, what color constancy is. You can see on the Wikipedia page, it's described as follows. Color constancy is an example of subjective constancy as a feature of the human color perception system, which ensures that the perceived colors of objects remain relatively constant under varying illumination conditions. So a green apple, for instance, looks green to us at midday when the main illumination is white sunlight, and also at sunset when the main illumination is red. This helps us to identify objects. So it's something that we've evolved. And the example that they give is this image that contains mostly red pixels. And now if we put up our scopes and we view this image, you'll see that there's only black, white, and red in a very narrow hue. But if we look at the image, we'll feel that there's, this is another shade. There's kind of a cyan-y shade here, or there's other colors going on in this image. This is also an example from the Wikipedia page that this color and this color, if I use my RGB picker, they have the same values. If the overall moves, our perception of this pink chart would change quite drastically. Interestingly also, Troy sent me this paper on Gaspard Monge. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. In 1878, when neither the physical basis of hue nor the retinal basis for color perception was established, the mathematician Gaspard Monge stated firmly that our color perceptions do not depend on an absolute value of the physical variable, but are influenced by the context and in particular our estimate of the illuminant, so the light source in any particular scene. He used this insight to explain color contrast effects and the paradox of Monge, the desaturation of red objects seen through a red filter. He proposed that when we estimate the chromaticity of the illuminant in any scene, because all surfaces reflect to us varying mixtures of 1, the body color of the object, and 2, the specular component that represents the illuminant, the light shining on it. He also realized that white objects have a special property. Provided that they are illuminated by a single illuminant, such objects exhibit no variation in chromaticity across their surface. Thus, at least one of the unique hues exists as an external reference on which the observer can agree. It is suggested that other hues may also have a basis in the external world. He has experiments where he takes a scene with various objects, and especially white, gray, and black objects, and viewed through a red filter, we will still be able to work out, we'll still feel that the white object is white. And his discussion is around that. And another experiment which he showed, this kind of image where we have sunlight coming in through the window, which is, we'd say, blue biased, and we have a candlelight which is very warm biased. While there's an object casting a shadow, we'll feel that this shadow, because it's not getting the warm candlelight, we'll feel that is blue. But once this object gets taken away, we'll feel that this entire piece of paper is a constant white color. We won't feel that it's blue. Monge proposes that the color contrast effects are byproducts of the normal process of color constancy. From surrounding objects, the visual system infers that the scene is lit by a colored illuminant, and the target region is then seen as having the hue of a surface that would deliver the same spectral signal to the eye if it were under such an illuminant. So this is how we naturally compensate, and we don't feel like we're drastically walking into an environment with a different color temperature, even though we are. You can observe this very clearly if you use a camera that has a fixed white balance setting and you walk into various environments. The brightness and then the color temperature will surprise you, whereas your eyes will just feel like it was all the same temperature. So what is the connection to Akiyoshi's work? You'll see that lots of his images are like, we just saw images that were tinted blue or tinted to a certain color or made grayer. And this, what's underlying here is a kind of what I'd call histogram manipulation. And that's, either in Photoshop or in a color correction system, we would do that quite often. We often do it in the other direction to balance images, but he's doing it to push things, what we would say is unbalanced, and to actually limit the gamut. So for example, this picture of this car. This is the image that's being displayed here. You can see how it fills the entire gamut from the white to the black, and the colors move out to fill out the gamut in all directions. This has now been transformed darker such that the image only fills this part of the gamut, or it's been lightened to fill the top half, or similarly pushed to the cyan corner, etc., etc. You know, this Coca-Cola can, you can see how it now sits up in just this part of the gamut. So simply put, what we're doing is we're taking the various R, G, and B aspects of the signal and we're scaling them. So for example, we could drop the red component to half power, and we could be taking the green and the blue up to be at some kind of full power. And then, you know, you could see how this, you know, we've moved the gamut. So now what was sitting there at black now sits at this higher location. Now you can see how it's represented here, where the peak of the red now sits at the floor of the other two channels, and the entire signal sits here in the cyan quadrant here of the vector scope. Also, what's interesting to note that if we view this image full screen, this still looks yellow to us. This still looks red. All these colors, this variation of colors, we can still work out what skin tone is, where the blue background is, the white shirts, even though this is totally biased to this kind of cyany, this color, this absence of red. It's an amazing factor of the human visual system, and it's really present in Akiyoshi's work and his analysis of our perception and the visual illusions that appear from it. I was asking about where this histogram technique came from, this histogram expansion and compression, and he said the idea was proposed by Arthur Shapiro, and he was a collaborator with Akiyoshi on a paper in 2018. And this paper is kind of probably well known. You probably know these images of tomato, where the raw image still, the raw image is obviously, you know, full color, but once it's overlaid with this low pass version, with the cyan, almost like a filter that's laid over, or using a histogram, which gives a similar effect, we can still discern the redness from the tomato, even though its actual color is this green. But our visual system can almost reinflate that collapsed gamut. In the paper, you can see the way that they've compressed the gamut from its normal state to something that's very biased. Well, they actually show it in reverse now, how that once it's had this filter added over it, they can re-expand it back to what our perception is making sense of, but the actual stimuli is a very distorted, collapsed gamut. So when I was discussing about creating images with Akiyoshi, I was asking him, what do you call the images you make? It feels like illusion is maybe the wrong name. They are test images that are designed to create some visual effect. Is this correct? And he said yes, he does call them illusions. And yeah, well, that is the word that he's using for them. Are you happy that your scientific work is also enjoyed by the public? And yeah, he's very happy with that. For some reason, your images remind me of sonar signals that are trying to decipher the depths of the ocean floor below. If the ocean is the human visual cognition system, and he's sending these images as kind of tests down into the depths to try and discern how we perceive things. His reply was that he feels that it becomes kind of an artistic process to try and decipher the depths of human visual perception. Then asked, when designing an image, is it a process of creative play, of adjusting values, or is it more of a calculated, based on theory in each case? He says, in some cases, after I see an image that hints at something, I produce a variety of images in an attempt to find out what it is. So this is the methodology of many variations, step and repeat. In other cases, I produce images based on a theory and then try and confirm it. I asked him what software packages he used, and he said it's mostly either CorelDRAW, but also he'd written some custom software in Java. For example, various setups that are implemented in Java. So for example, you want 20 frames and go start, where you can automate various iterations of his various concepts. Also, other JavaScripts that can translate colors and plot them from various color spaces, and other tools that he uses in his work. I noticed that the artworks on his site seem to be some about color, color constancy and color illusions, and then some very much about motion. And this is called Vection. When I asked him about this, about these two categories, he said he does not study Vection per se. Vection refers to the illusion sensation of self-motion that can be induced by a visual stimuli, even when the person is stationary. The person is stationary, or the visual stimuli is stationary. For example, the color-dependent Fraser-Wilcox illusion that are linked with color and motion. So you look at this and you'll see, don't need to tell you what you're seeing, you'll see it, how the colors crawl around. Like the snakes is an example where it's a static image, but it seems to have motion. These images have some degree of motion, especially when there's some kind of change in position. It's called rollers because it feels like it's turning. If you're going to analyze the structure, you can see that within each one, they're just the basic artistic theory of light one side, shadow the other side, and then complementary colors. These are all kind of themes that are used within these various illusions. The idea that the center feels like it's spreading. The more you stare at it, the more it spreads. I did notice that some of these, like these grid illusions, they seem to work best in the peripheral vision. The point that you're staring at stays totally fine, but around your periphery, you'll get these white dots sparkling, and some of them are quite a really strong effect. And these are known as scintillation grids. I asked him about the topic of illusory colors. Illusory color, what does that term mean to you? Aren't all colors illusory on some level, created by our perception? And he replied that if an object appears to be a different color from the color of each pixel alone, then we say that it's an illusory color. Since the color itself is illusory, you could say that we're talking nonsense. So yeah, there's a lot of, you do get yourself into a black hole very quickly discussing these topics. Images like the illusory red Coke can seem to be resolution dependent. If we zoom in to see the pixel detail, then the illusion disappears. Zooming out makes the illusion reappear again. Do you know what causes this resolution threshold, before and after the illusion starts working? He answered that the threshold is the size at which the spatial color mixing is established. And I think that the mechanism of color constancy is what makes the illusion visible when it exceeds the threshold. For example, we zoom in and we just have black and white stripes in this area. But as we zoom out, there'll be a certain point when we'll start feeling, definitely by now, so somewhere between here and here, the resolution of the pixels is such, these stripes is such that it starts kicking in. And now obviously if we zoom it very small, then almost like the saturation as such of this red gets more and more. But if we go in and sample those pixels, there's no red there, it's just black and white relative to this blue gamut offset, this blue white point. I asked, what is the underlying principle of all these illusory color images? As long as the relative distance of the image gamut is maintained, our cognition will fill in the missing parts. Is this correct? Especially reference to collapsing gamuts. I think it depends totally on color constancy. If a color is uniformly applied, I think the solid color can be restored to some extent. So he showed this on his website of the color solid. So this is the full RGB space being used, and you can see the extent of the histograms. RG and B are totally full, and how it's portrayed in the HCV space. Then being reduced, darkening was the first example. Then lightening, lifting all three up. The later example of this, which is used in those the Coke can example, is where the peak of the red channel now becomes the floor of the blue and green channel, and it's all the black point has now been lifted way up, halfway up the color space, and everything's biased to this one side. We've moved from there to there, all in one quadrant, but now our perception can re-expand and reinflate that gamut based on what we feel should be the black point, the white point, the neutral axis, and we can perceive colors even though they're not actually there in the stimuli. It's quite fascinating. I asked, what other implications do these illusory color studies have? He says he's doing research on perceptual transparency, including color translucency and color constancy. So just to catch up on what that means, if we look on Wikipedia about perceptual transparency is the phenomenon of seeing one surface behind another. So in this kind of totally black and white image where there's no 3 dimensions, we will start placing these at different depths. Our perception will start trying to decide what is in front of what. We will add spatial interpretation onto an image on a flat plane. And we will also start feeling that there's a see-through component to some of these objects depending on how they're placed and their various stimuli values. Also transparency and the aspects of that. And we end up with this kind of situation where we have opacity in various amounts, translucency, and then transparency. They're just kind of very interesting properties. And all of this can be totally 2D images, but from just our perception and our experience of moving and operating in a 3D world, we assign these depth-based meanings to what we're seeing. On a broad sense, I felt that he often used the yellow to blue axis. So I asked this question. I said, I get the feeling that the yellow to blue axis is very important to your images, or maybe it has the strongest effects. Many of the motion and color images use this color contrast. And he was skeptical about that. He says, does this mean that certain color axes are more likely to cause color illusions? I said, if so, I do not agree with it. So yeah, that was just a coincidence. Some of his images are based on these scintillation grids. He mentioned that these scintillation grid illusions are based on a paper by Michael Schroff and Bernard Lingelbach, and also Ernst Wist. You can see the images that they have used for their test. The viewer fixates at a certain area of the screen, and then in the periphery, in this case you'll get white dots appearing at the black vertices. In this case you'll get the inverse. The vertices will darken, not in the central focus but only in the peripheral. It's very surprising how strong some of these effects are. And he mentioned that it's based on this scintillation grid illusion, and also he feels it's quite similar to the Maxwell spot illusion and the Heidinger's brushes, which are effects that are quite similar and are related to the difference of color receptors in the foveal region. In this foveal area, we get a dropping off of this sensitivity, and hence if you stare at this blue background, you get a darkening at the certain point. And now Akiyoshi's come up with ways to enhance that effect even more. We're staring at one dot, it will darken because it's at the center of it's at the foveal pointer on your retina, and the outside dots will appear brighter. Just to make it even clearer, if you look at an image like this, up close may not get the effect, but as it's zoomed quite far back, if you're focusing on an area and you've got a range of dots, you'll see that these ones start feeling darker, but without moving your head, without moving your eyes, in the periphery, they'll all seem way brighter. This is a paper and a research topic that Akiyoshi is busy with at the moment. And also how the spectral responses and the position of the blue primary on LCD and OLED displays has a varying strength difference of these effects. This next section was really intriguing to me. On some of his website, he proposed a new type of spatial color mixing. It's spatial, but he also looks at temporal color mixing, but we'll get onto that later. So I asked, how do you feel about going against common conventions? For example, you tried to make subtractive RGB models and additive CMY models, which is the inverse of what normally gets used. This is quite different to the accepted way of thinking. It seems like you like to push boundaries. Can you tell us more about this mindset and these researchers? He said, I'm glad to know that you're looking at the details of my research results. I now understand that even CMY, subtractive color mixing, is in principle a type of additive color mixing. Now, this might be quite hard to understand, but what we have here is he's made subtractive RGB models and additive CMY models, and we can still make an image from these. For example, an electronic display. we have 3 primaries, and each primary can go from totally off to 100% on. So we'd have maximum red to 0 red, green, and blue. In terms of printing, I mean, we're taking out normally in printing we have CMYK. K is a black ink. These are all inks on white paper. So in the case of the monitor, we have a black screen, which is off, and a white screen, which is made of full 100% RGB. In the case of printing, we have white made of no ink being put down on white paper, and black being made of lots of CMY and K, which is black ink being put down. So if we first remove the black ink and move it back to a 3 primary system, you can still use the magenta, cyan, and yellow to create this kind of image with those sets of primaries. Now, taking it a step further, Akiyoshi has done experiments to say that what if we now make the range of the primary, not red 0 to maximum, we say the primary is now a range or a run from maximum red to maximum magenta. Now maximum green to maximum yellow, maximum blue to maximum cyan. So it's kind of redesigning the primaries, combining additive and subtractive mixtures. And if we go in and look at this image of the train, then it makes clear sense. So where we have black, they're all off. Where we have white, red, green, and blue are all very strong. These lights or whatever they are would be very red and very low on the other 2 channels. This blue area of the train, we'd bias, the red would be low, the green and blue would be higher, and we'd make our primary colors up like that to create our image. In this case, the CMY, because we don't have our black, so we're missing we can't really get dark enough, but it's the same thing. Like these so-called black areas now have maximum ink, call it in each, and the white areas, obviously it's just letting, in the print situation, would just be the paper letting the white shine through. Now, in this third situation, this middle situation, where it's a combination of the 2, you would think it would be a total failure. But you can see that at this depth, we still get an image. This could still be a valid color system. Bear in mind that the pixels have been made into these very obvious, huge pixel grids, pixel stripes, which is another issue. But we can still convey color. If we zoom right in, black, full black in this color system is 100% red, 100% green, 100% blue. And white is 100% cyan, yellow, and magenta. So that may be hard to understand. This is now our peak white in this new developed space. This is our peak black. So this is, in my opinion, this is a very kind of adventurous and creative way to restructure these color spaces. What is done is in our typical additive color mixture, which is what we have on the left here, we have our 3 primaries and we have our darkest and our whitest, like all off, all on, and the 3 primaries and the 3 secondaries, and that we're very familiar with. In the subtractive color model, which is just similar but slightly different because we're missing the K, the black channel, which we would have for printing. Our darkest is full cyan, full magenta, full yellow, and our lightest is neither. And then we have the equivalents of red primaries and cyan primaries and secondaries. In this case, these are the primaries, and these red, green, and blue now become the secondaries. In this case, what he's done has said the spatial color mixing of primary colors in an RGB consists of 3 subpixels, red, green, and blue. If now, to create this new system, you add 100% green to the red subpixel, 100% blue to the green subpixel, and 100% red to the blue subpixel, we get this color mixing, the kind of intermediate color mixture, which is what we have here. You can see how we've got this addition of these 2 models. Our brightest is now CMY, 100% CMY. Our darkest is now 100% RGB. And, well, you struggle to define it, but yeah, primaries and secondaries colors. To fully understand this, one needs to link up several previously mentioned ideas. There's the sub-gamut idea, so we're reducing or we're distorting into a different gamut, because we're still on an RGB display. That's not changing. But we're creating a new pixel structure above that. So there's a sub-gamut idea going on. The inherent idea of color mixing that happens at a certain resolution. and the base assumption about the range of possible manipulations. For example, all on to all off in an RGB system versus CMYK system. And now this hybrid system, which is essentially going from, it's now taking its max RGB, which are the darker three primaries, to max CMYK, which is kind of the secondaries in the original system. And we're saying that that is now the extent of our gamut. The pixels are large enough to see, and we can zoom in and out. So this is like, we zoom in on the eye there. At a distance, we get the image of the picture. As we zoom in, it looks, we're just seeing the pixels and we can't make sense of it. There's also where there's a random noise distribution which has been applied to the location of the pixels. The Mona Lisa, the eyes there. Especially if we zoom out more, we get the image of the Mona Lisa. But if we zoom in, this is actually seeing on the eye. And the same things here. So this is another combination. We're using Ostwald breaking down, turning into horizontal stripes, displaying in these other pixel matrices. So lots of iterative concepts being added here. Things to note are that there's the vertical pixel raster used to create larger scale primary color system on top of a normal sRGB device. The pixels are large enough to see, and the definition of the gamut minimum and maximum ranges primaries have all been modified. Just to remind that in video and in printing, at the lower level of any device, whether it's a monitor or whether it's printing on a paper, there's no actual color mixing. We're just printing primary colors of various amounts. The mixing takes place in our brains. So once we view at a sufficient distance to actually not be able to see the pixels too clearly, then this switch happens and we start mixing and creating these new perceptions of colors in oranges and yellows and purples and all these intermediate shades of grays and hues that when viewed at the right distance we can now see the image. To view these in the HCV color space, we can actually get a better idea of what's going on. We can see how that, typically and just bear in mind that they're not pixels in the middle here. This image is only either, has values, because it's the stripes now. It's not proper sub pixels. It's stripes of varying green, blue, and red that are placed next to each other in these larger pixel clusters or stripes as such. So this is the standard RGB, the equivalent of the standard RGB method, applied at a lower level on the monitor. We don't perceive it this way, but this is what's happening on a lower level. Or the CMY model, roughly equivalent to printing. And now the combination model, where the primary colors, the range over which the primaries can vary are either from blue to magenta, that's the one primary and the range which it can vary, or red to yellow, second primary, and then green to cyan. It's quite, obviously, no one would say that this is when compared to the full color RGB at full resolution, etc., yeah, it's a lower contrast image, but still very amazing that with these very surprising set of primaries, you can still create an intelligible image. The brain can still reconstruct back the image that it's being shown. Quite fascinating. He tries very many variations. You can see these ones are more like, it's now combinations of the traditional additive and traditional subtractive ones, and then the hybrid ones all added together. And you'll see that this is the new image, the new primaries in each case. So blue and red additive with magenta subtractive. And all the combinations. Now this is what's really fascinating about his work, is it just goes again and again and again through all these options, trying each one. Even slightly different combinations where it's the one primary is just a single axis and then a plane. So it's like we're using the wall of this blue to green side, not the whole cube, just the wall of that, using the gamut, histogram, or just using that part of the gamut, plus red. And you can see that how we still get a fairly intelligible image from this very limited gamut. So this is a way of kind of almost redesigning primaries or rethinking about primaries and understanding how the illusion of color that we see can be recreated in very surprising ways. I was asking about these methods of using like the gamut wall or just these new axes. He said, I think these are established through the actions of lightness constancy or color constancy. In other words, it shows that the visual system can perceive the original colors by removing the colors that are uniformly added in the pixels of the image. So these tints or these distortions that we make, the visual cognition system can actually take them out. You know, just as like the Monge had his red filter, which goes over the scene and you can still work out which are the white parts, which are the black parts. The same thing, we can go through very extreme color distortions and we still know that we still feel that the red tomato is red or the red Coke can is red. I wanted to dive more into these various types of pixel structures that he used, you know, the vertical strips, horizontal strips, or the Ostwald system. I asked how did you develop the idea for these various pixel grids or columns? Vertical stripes with the Ostwald's color system of separation, for example. It seems like a mix between the image and a waveform of the image signal, which is what I thought at the time. We use waveforms and vector scopes of our color grading work for film and video. Is it essentially taking the Ostwald separation and plotting them in each column? And yeah, he's doing similar things to that. He said it is spatial color mixing of black, white, and color contents obtained from a given image according to the sRGB modified Ostwald's color system. So yeah, these are crude pixel systems. It's almost, you know, you're taking the image, calculating the Ostwald color in each case, and then, you know, plotting it horizontally or vertically for each of these images. And, you know, again, it's all very resolution dependent. So round about here, it looks like Jack Nicholson at this kind of distance. But as we're up here, you know, we're getting inside the pixels and we can't work out what it is. Perception is obviously resolution dependent. So again, my question about resolution, the further these images are away, the better the colors mix together. Too close and we see the columns or the pixels, you seem to be doing pixel level artworks. And he answered, by studying these spatial color mixing systems, I'm creating various colors or lightness illusion images. So yeah, that's the whole gig. Also, as part of this, you know, the intense analysis, he will take several images and then this concept of isolating one parameter and then varying it and seeing how the image is created is also a very common situation. So each of the parameters will be held constant or varied to create these various systems, and they essentially, just like he had with the color spaces, so you can see how the idea is linking back now. Through the variation on certain parameters, he's doing sweeps through the color spaces and getting certain ranges of colors, but also just within this, you can see how important the true brightness here is on this HCV color space and how it represents inside of there. So just on this one slice through the full 3D color space. So these are his isoluminance, isohue, and isochroma, isosaturation images. It's all analysis at various slices through the color space as represented here. On the mixture side, other than these spatial juxtaposition methods, it also does some interesting temporal mixtures. So it's very distorted with a histogram distortion method of creating kind of three plates, which neither of these three plates look anything like the original image. You know, this being the original image with the blue sky and green grass, red train, and everything. But when they flash together, we get some sense of the gamut. So because of the persistence of vision in our eyes, we can piece together which part is the blue sky, where the red train is, and the green grass. This is a whole nother area which we didn't speak much about, but I can see that he's doing a lot of work on this temporal color mixing as well. The temporal color mixing system would be equivalent to a spatial color mixing system. So, you know, he's kind of creating an equivalence between the two. I was asking about if he'd done any research on the 6 primary systems that might be coming in, and actually he's pulling in the other direction. He's simplifying to create cognition effects. So I think, it's not really influential on his research to have, like, for example, a 4 primary or a 6 primary display that has all these extra components. It's like he's simplifying the palette and doing pixel level analysis and bringing it up to on a scale that we can actually see what the pixels are doing. I wanted to ask him about these very well-known face illusions. Now, this is this is the full contrast image. And we see this is white, and if we go in with the picker, we can, we can analyze, it's 255, this face is black, it's 000. But then the way the illusion is presented is in this mode, where 50% gray on this face and 50% gray on this face, but you'd still swear that this one's white and this one's black. So I thought it'd be interesting to actually to do it ourselves. Got 2 nodes here where we can manipulate the left and the right side individually. And so if we now look at our histogram, if we take this histogram range and we're going to take the lower part of the right hand image and we're going to put it on 50%. So we're going to raise the black of this face up to 50% now. On the other side, we're going to take the peak white and we're going to drop it down to 50%. So you can see on my parade here, I've now made this equal to this, and we still have the perception, compared to that in the bypass mode, obviously very, very high contrast image. Now it's slightly different to the way he's done it. He's done different transformations, but you can see that the effect is still in place, where stimuli wise we're on 50% gray here, we're on 50% gray here, but we still get the essence of this. Two pictures say very different things to us. I mean, in his image, he's done a lot of other transforms as well. He's transformed the levels of the hair and things like that to get the illusion even more apparent. But yeah, we can actually make ourselves a version of it, which is quite impressive. And I asked, are the amounts of the offsets that you've done to the backgrounds or hair or the entire image, are they a fixed amounts based on theory, or is it more of a manual kind of play process? And he said in this case they were done by kind of more like calculation. I asked him, what do these images teach us about visual cognition? He said that lightness constancy and 2 types of transformation, either multiplicative color change, like a transparency change, and an additive one, making it translucent, are demonstrated. So this harkens back hugely to the episodes that I've done on visual cognition with Troy, where he talks a lot about this idea of transparency and perception and depth perception that comes from our cognitive processes. And it's as if these 2 phases, like this one, Troy talks about it as being the gain and offset dimensions, where like this side has walked into a shadow. It's a white face, but now it's in a shadow, but we still see it as a white face. This side, it's like there's smoke in the room now. The dark black has now been misted up with kind of an atmospheric thing in front. This is how we could interpret these things. Obviously, it's nothing that hasn't happened. It's totally synthetic image with synthetic manipulations, but our cognition can bring these interpretations alive. So I asked her, is it just that we can't trust our eyes? And his reply was, light constancy is a necessary function for vision. So it has been shown that the human eye can be trusted. It's always these aren't tricks. These are actually adaptive mechanisms that help us function in a wide range of environments. My image is a demonstration of light constancy in the form of a visual illusion. Is it telling us that our vision is totally contextual and relative rather than fixed and absolute? And his answer was yes. We can see that perception is not a one-to-one correspondence with physical stimuli, but is designed to enable us to perceive what we should perceive. And that's really it's like you making it like the boat can always right itself. It won't capsize, even in very stormy seas. Like even in totally distorted lighting conditions, we can still tell which is the white object, tell what's food, what isn't food, and all these kind of things. Quite amazing. Does your research consider the theories of top-down versus bottom-up when considering visual cognition? Brain informing eyes versus eyes informing brain, or things like the free energy principle? His reply was that perception is bottom-up in that perception is determined mechanically. But I think it is top-down in that the form, the gestalt, for what should be perceived is prepared in advance. You kind of know where you are and roughly what you're looking at. So your brain is overlaying meaning on an interpretation on what you're seeing. If we regard the top-down aspect as the effect of thought and memory, then I think perception has a small top-down aspect. So yeah, it's ratios. I asked him about the future. What are your goals both artistically and academically? What is your hope for the future and the combination of these two domains, i.e., technical and artistic, research, psychology, research and art? His answer was, at the moment, as a faculty member of perceptual psychology at a university, I'm carrying out my academic work using my artistic skills. After I retire, it would be nice to leave academia and pursue art, with a smiley face. And I thanked him very much for his time, and I really hope to have future discussions with him on these very exciting topics. And I'd highly encourage you to go to his website and dig around. There is so much there that will challenge the way you think about perception, and really intense analysis. Even if you're just going to learn the way that he lays out his work and the way that he works through problems, I think it's highly worthwhile. As a closing thought, I'll just show you one other thing, just another gem hiding in there. So Alan Gilchrist, who was mentioned in previous episodes with Troy, did a talk at Akiyoshi's University, and you can see analysis and discussion of how this middle gray cube can be cut out and moved into this area, and we get these variable gamut of lightness and brightness, and that how plastic the perception of brightness is. And he's done analysis on how these two shapes sit and showing where they sit in their gradients and how the illusion breaks, and lots of other spin-off mechanisms from that. So I'd highly recommend going to his website and looking through these vast lists of various illusions. There's a huge amount of stuff there, and really a treasure trove of stuff that you can explore. I'd also encourage you to go back and look at, now once you've had this, done some looking around at the details of Akiyoshi's work on his website, I'd also remind you to go back and listen again now to the 2 episodes done with Troy on visual cognition, and you'll see how that these two worlds have a lot of crossover, and obviously it's the same concepts that have been looked at in slightly different ways. So I hope you enjoyed that. It was a bit of a one-sided conversation, but I hope the concepts came across, and it's just been a big inspiration to me looking at his artwork. So again, a big thanks to Dr. Akiyoshi Kitaoka. And a special thanks to Mose Elgabri for introducing me to Dr. Kitaoka and translating our discussions.
Thanks again for listening to the Color Mentor podcast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can leave comments on Patreon or Instagram. The Instagram handle is color.mentor. And remember to head over to Color Mentor page on patreon.com and check out the goodies there. We'll see you next time.